If the 10-year yield spikes and money starts flowing out of equities, what is the probability of the Fed buying mutual funds? I think very high. I mean, you see this gradual progression with the monetary heroin. It starts with QE, then it does, or it starts with artificially low interest rates, then you do QE, then you do QE 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, infinity. And then that's not enough. So then you've got to do a set of special purpose vehicles to backstop corporate debt. And then it's just, you got to add more and more and more, just like the drug, just like the heroin addict. To get the same high, you need more and more and more of whatever it is you're injecting into your vein. And what we're doing is we're just injecting the funny money into the system. Now, the transfer mechanism, I would disagree with a lot of people. I don't think it's just a result of the Fed increasing the size of its balance sheet. Most of you know that, or my position there. I completely agree with Snyder, and that just that in and of itself really doesn't do anything unless the Fed is buying directly from individuals. But see, there again, it would require a third party in the sense that the government would have to deficit spend in order to, because you'd have to create new dollars that were getting into the system via the government spending. And so if that was happening as a result of the Fed buying a lot of the debt, then you'd see M2. I know it's not a very good measurement, but you'd see the amount of dollars in the real economy circulating, or the amount of dollars in the real economy chasing goods and services actually increase. So you guys, I've done a ton of whiteboard videos on that, but I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole on that topic. But let's see, make sure I'm getting this 10-year spikes. Oh yeah, right. So my point there is, when you see the next downturn, I think they're going to have to pull out more ammunition. So what's next? I mean, they bought corporate debt, buying equities, right? I mean, it's just kind of the Japan playbook without the deflation. It's the Japan, it's the Japan playbook with high levels of inflation. That's kind of what we're seeing here play out in the U.S. But what's interesting is we're seeing massive inflation in Europe, as we just mentioned. It's probably going to get a lot worse. And you're actually seeing quite a bit of inflation in Japan as well. So, I mean, the world is going to most likely experience some severe pain in the next few years as a result of stagflation. Again, that doesn't mean that inflation goes straight up. That's another mistake that people make. They think that it just goes from 6.5 to 7.5 to 7.9 to 10 to 15 to 20 to 40, and then it's hyperinflation. That's not the way it works. Look at the 1940s, look at the 1970s even, and you'll see that inflation doesn't go up in a straight line. It goes from 7.9 to 8.5, then back down to 7.5, then back down to 6, then up to 10, then up to 12, then back down to 8, and it's volatile like everything else. Now, you could argue that back in the 70s you could get positive real rates. That's true. Back in the 40s you can get positive real rates, and you still had inflation go from 19% in 1947 down to -2 within a matter of a couple years. And so if it can happen in the 1940s, it can definitely happen in the 2020s. It's just a matter of aggregate demand, which is a matter of, in my opinion, government deficit spending. And how are they spending that? Is it just, as an example, if they started doing more stimmies tomorrow, and to the degree to which they did stimmies in 2020, and just made that permanent, okay. Now you've got some massive aggregate demand that most likely, although I think inflation would still go up, then down a little bit, then up, then down a little bit. It'd still go up in a kind of a stair step way, or kind of a, like a mountain range. It's just not going, it's not linear, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But that would mean we're going to see something more like the 70s than the 1940s. That's for sure. But it's about government spending. I mean, if the government continues trillion-dollar deficits, that's not going to cut it, because you got to increase it. You got to ever increase it. or else prices just get to a high water mark and then start to flatline and go up, a little slower. So, what's going to happen when, and I listened to Zoltan. He did a interview that's on YouTube. I think the channel is Financial Repression. It's not Financial Repression Net. I'm trying to remember the channel name. It's not Financial Repression Network. It's Financial Repression Analytics or something like that. But he did a pretty good interview with these guys, and his kind of base case when looking at the yield curve is that it's flat and that should be a recession, but I don't think it's going to be because the government's going to come in and deficit spend, just like they did in 2020, and so that he's not really buying the yield curve. And again, if they do that, then you're going to see 1970s. If they don't do that for whatever reason, because there's political gridlock or what have you, then you're most likely going to see the 1940s. But even if you see the 1940s, that's still, I mean, okay, is that really good when we go 2 or 3 years with inflation at 20%, and then you go back down to where it's okay, now it's just 3 or 4%, then it spikes back up to 15, 20%. I mean, that's by no means a good outcome. That's still extremely bad. And the standard of living is going down dramatically. But yeah, I think the Fed knows that they can't allow equity markets to tank. It's just, and they're going to do everything they can to prop them up. I don't think that's a reason to buy. I would never buy for that reason, just because you think the Fed's going to do something. But I think that's their playbook. What role will commercial banks play in the CBD? Pretty much the same role they play now. I mean, now all they are is just they're like a lead generator, or they're like a mortgage company, or a mortgage company that just does the paperwork. They're like salespeople, where you got these mortgage companies where they're just like a marketing firm. They just run advertising on the radio or on Google or online or whatever, and then they generate the lead, and then they basically do the sale. But there's a back end entity that may be part of that company or maybe part of a different group that actually lends the money. They're just kind of a front man for it, and then they just take a commission. Basically, they're just like a salesman. And so that's pretty much most of the banks. I think that's what they do now. The majority of their lending, they don't keep that on their books. They might issue the loan, but then they just shoot it straight over to Fannie and Freddie. So, then they just take the fee. They just pocket a little bit of a spread. So I think that's the same thing that they'll do in the future, even with a CBDC. People say, "Oh my gosh, it's going to put the banks out of business and all these." Not really. Again, that would imply that right now the big banks are making a lot of money by keeping loans on their books. I don't think they are. So they'll just pocket a fee for being a middleman and then just being kind of a branch of the Federal Reserve. I mean, that's all they are right now anyway. I mean, look at Bank of America. Look at Wells Fargo. Look at Chase. Look at these big banks. All they are is just an extension of the government. I mean, they're so regulated. Is there any difference between Wells Fargo and B of A? I mean, no, they're identical, other than just a little logo. Because they're so heavily regulated, the government just it's like fascism. I mean, sure, they might be privately held, but the government pretty much controls everything. So you don't have any choice when it comes to your bank unless you go with like a credit union or a small community bank or something like that. So I think it's just pretty much the exact same thing. I don't see how it would change too much. I think the big oops, sorry guys, I'm trying to fix my light here. I think the big thing that would change is since the Fed is backstopping everything and they have an infinite balance sheet, I think the lending standards would change quite a bit. I think they'd go from a credit score to a social score, because even now, even if the banks aren't keeping the loans on their books, the people that are buying those loans still care about a credit score. So that's still how they're initiating the loan. You know, they've got standards. They've got like a checklist for Fannie and Freddie for underwriting. So I think that's really what changes, is the underwriting for the loan.